60 hours after the disaster, still no official word has been reported outside of the Soviet Union.
The Swedish Minister of Energy phoned me on the Monday, and I was in my office in Vienna, and she told me that they had measured very much increased radioactivity near our power plant in Forsmark in the east of Sweden, and they had concluded that it must have come from abroad. Did we know anything about it, was her question. And we said that no, we did not, but we are ready to contact others, and we contact the Poles. They didn't have any nuclear power plant, but if there was anything else that could have happened there, we contacted the Russians, of course.
What has happened? An explosion? A radioactive cloud? Serious contamination? It was Sweden that alerted us.
3 days after the accident, while Gorbachev is still trying to gather data, American and European spy satellites turn to the Soviet Union and discover the ruins of the Ukrainian plant. The smoke, wafting from the gaping hole, shows up clearly in thermal vision.
In the evening of that Monday, the 28th it would be, we had a message from Mr. Petrosian, who was the head of Atomic Energy Commission in Russia, in which he told us about the accident. And about the same time, the Russians actually released the information to the world.
Obviously, over at the Politburo, we immediately decided it was essential that all facts be reported to us from then on. So I called on the KGB. I told them to follow everything that was happening over there and to report the conversations the scientists were having. I told them to report all of that information back, to me, personally.
It has taken over 48 hours to get accurate information about the disaster. 2 days during which the 43,000 inhabitants of Pripyat are exposed to contamination. The crisis continues to grow. At the bottom of the destroyed reactor, 1,200 tons of white-hot magma continue to burn at over 3,000 degrees, sending liters of radioactive gas and dust into the atmosphere. The whole of Europe is at the mercy of the winds. On the third day of the crisis, General Antochkin and his fleet of 80 helicopters are sent from Moscow to fight the blaze and put the fire out. When he arrives, the general flies 200 meters above the blown-out reactor.
Because of the fire, the temperature at that height was between 120 to 180 degrees Celsius. Our dosimeter, the instrument for measuring radiation, only went up to 500 Röntgens. The needle was going crazy. It was completely off the scale. I think there were at least 1,000 Röntgens at a height of 200 meters.
Even at that altitude, a half hour of exposure could be lethal. The strong current of radioactive hot air streaming up from the reactor makes it impossible to get closer. They will have to improvise some way of carrying out their mission.
Something needed to be done as quickly as possible. Put out the fire and seal up the reactor to be able to get close enough to do other work. It also needed to be closed up to stop the radioactive dust from spreading. It was getting blown off by the wind. We really needed to act fast.
A gigantic ballet begins. Top pilots have been rushed back from the Afghan front to fly helicopters carrying soldiers who will toss 80-kilo sandbags into the blaze with their bare hands. They hope to smother the fire by filling the reactor with tons of sand and boric acid, which neutralizes radiation. The first day, 110 sorties. The next, 300. The radiation level above the reactor is over 3,500 Röntgens, almost 9 times the lethal dose. Some of the pilots make up to 33 flights in a single day.
Each time they went, they received 5 or 6 röntgens. If they were slow, it was even more. After throwing 6, 7, 8 bags, they were drenched in sweat from the heat. After a few missions, my soldiers would go wash up and eat. After a while, they'd start throwing up.
Since the crisis began, radiation victims have been sent to Moscow's Hospital No. 6. It has the country's only service, which specializes in acute radiation sickness and illnesses linked to massive doses of radiation exposure. The initial symptoms of radiation sickness, vomiting, nausea and diarrhea, are followed by a latency period. It's only later that much more fatal symptoms appear, such as deterioration of bone marrow and horrible burns that eat flesh down to the bone.
When they arrived at the clinic, it was very hard, psychologically speaking. They came straight from the airport. Almost all of them were young. They arrived during the latency period. They felt fine. They were all dressed alike, wearing the same pajamas. They were making jokes. But we already knew that a lot of them were going to die. 27 of them died quite quickly. They'd all received huge doses of radiation and were suffering from life-threatening burns.
Большие дозы облучения, и особенно большинство из этих людей имели несовместимую с жизнью ожоги радиационные.
For 15 years, only the first victims will be acknowledged by the authorities. "30 kilometers east of the plant, the forest has been scorched by the radioactive blast from the explosion. But the disaster area already stretches well beyond. Since the explosion, radioactive particles carried by the clouds have been falling with the rain. A leopard spot pattern of contamination has affected the Ukraine as well as Belarus and Russia. On the 1st of May, the wind shifts, and areas of Kiev are also contaminated. As seen from this map, drawn up from the readings taken by Colonel Grebenyuk's men. The seriously contaminated areas appear in red, surrounded by areas where the radiation level was normal. But the population is still kept in the dark. There is only one report, a tiny article on the bottom of page 3 of the Pravda, playing down the accident and claiming the danger has passed.
The roof was caving in, and there we were acting as if nothing was happening. By going ahead with the May Day festivities, it was like the country refused to acknowledge the situation. That was the second